Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A. It is January 16th, 2020 now. Now, I think I missed last week's Q&A because I had to travel out of town for a seminar, but we are back this week, so get things back on track. Had a variety of questions. No particular order here, but excuse me, I got a little bit of cough too, but bear with me. I'll go over to Facebook here. So, all right, there's a keto diehard on the tube that increases intake from 2,000 cals daily to 4,000 cals for 21 days. He kept all expenditure variables steady, and he actually lost a few pounds. Pretty sure he gained strength too, not surprisingly. He's an extremely lean, albeit muscular male. He uses this experiment to further his claims that calories in versus calories out is nonsense and it's all about food selection. What are your thoughts on what types of adaptations could be happening in this case to cause the weight loss? Well, the first and main adaptation would just be increased BMR or those negative. Here's the things I would probably want to know. How lean is he? How long has he been this lean? How depleted is he? You know what I mean? So what's going to happen to these nutrients when he takes them in? Typically we hear, typically carbohydrates are going to cause the biggest or the quickest, I guess you want to say, reversal of these adaptations. So, refeeding, for example, right? Increase calories via carbohydrate mainly, and metabolic rate goes up. We see people lose weight even with large increases, right? At least temporarily, until glycogen stores fill up, and then they're going to start gaining weight at some point. But anytime you're coming out of a caloric deficit, you're going to be working towards reversing those adaptations. So that's the biggest thing. I mean, he says he kept expenditure variables steady. So assuming that's true, it's just a metabolic adaptation of some kind. His metabolism is increasing. So it says he's lean. Pretty sure says he's extremely lean. So in someone extremely lean, it's a lot less surprising because they could easily, if they're extremely lean. I've had countless people coming out of contest prep, for example, or really hard fat loss phases where they get extremely lean, and you add in calories, any type of macronutrient you're adding in, taking them out of a caloric deficit, they start dropping weight, in which case they're back in a caloric deficit again, right? Because they're, metabolic adaptation. So to say calories in and calories out is nonsense, that doesn't really prove anything. I would want to take someone that, if you took someone that was not extremely lean, so not in a compromised state, take someone that's maybe at their metabolic ceiling, so their metabolic rate is at its peak, right? They're not down-regulated, and they're not extremely lean. They're not depleted. Their intramuscular triglycerides, in this case, aren't depleted, and their intramuscular glycogen stores aren't depleted. And then double their calories and see what happens. If that person loses weight because of a magical food selection, then you're on to something, right? But someone in a really downregulated state, if you're extremely lean, the receptiveness to food it's a whole different level. And we don't really have, a lot of the studies that we look at in metabolic adaptation they're not always focused on people that are extremely lean. We do have some case studies in bodybuilders, right? Talking about post-contest and all the things that happens hormonally. But I've seen it over and over again. You add calories into people. Even, I give you a perfect example. Take someone that is very lean. They come out of a show, they eat junk that is very fat laden, and they lose weight for the first week or 2 weeks. Okay. Now, granted, this person's probably going from, maybe if they were eating 2,000 calories, they're probably going up to 8,000 calories a day. So it's a little bit harder shift than this, but still, it does happen if you're in that very, very lean state. So I don't really think that proves a whole lot. And I'm not sure exactly what he means by food selection. I don't know if you mean foods, like actual macronutrient selection, so carbohydrates versus fat, or just the food that you're eating. Excuse me, sorry about that. But if we're talking about just food selection in general, yeah, I mean, if they were eating a bunch of junk and they started eating less processed foods, then they're probably have a lot less inflammation, and they're going to drop weight from that, and they're going to look better even though they're eating more. That's just a fluid and inflammation shift. It's not a fat shift. So there's some things to consider there for sure. All right, next, curious about your thoughts on IGF-1, LR3 specifically. Seems a lot of people are having some luck with it. Mainly interested in it for building muscle, pumps, and fullness. I'm curious how it affects insulin sensitivity. In addition, is it a good or bad idea to use it when in a keto diet for insulin sensitivity reset? My initial thought is that it would help reset, but once fasted BG gets down, you could have a chance to go hypo. Well, here's the thing. In these IGF analogs, to my knowledge, they don't use recombinant technology. They're not going to be able to be utilized in vivo. So I wouldn't waste money on them, to be honest. Now with that said, people that take them, they do seem to get some partitioning from them. So, I mean, remember, they are insulin-like, right? So they, if that's the case, then they have some partitioning benefit, right? However, do they actually act like IGF and have that synergy with, with insulin, for example, to build muscle? To my knowledge, none of them are processed with the right recombinant technology, so it wouldn't matter, not in humans anyhow. So I wouldn't even waste money on it. I mean, if you want to do an insulin sensitivity reset, just do it with, you can use other things that lower hepatic glucose output, metformin, for example. Granted, it's not the same thing. It's not like insulin, or just lower calories briefly, lose some body fat, change macronutrient ratios, whatever's pertinent to you. But no, there's really none of these analogs are using the right technology to be absorbed in vivo. So, okay. All right. Thoughts on percussion instruments as an additional form of therapy? As in, I asked as in banging on a drum. They said yes. Will banging your head on a drum or between cymbals result in neurological stimulus? Positive. That they're talking about like Theragun, Hypervolt, all that. The massage guns, Tim Tam. I don't know if there's like any actual studies on these. They're pretty new. I do have one. I have a cheaper one. Excuse me. I think it's the Jaku or something like that, I think. And yeah, I mean, when I use it, it definitely loosens the area up. It has different variable, different speed settings, a couple different attachments, all that stuff. Yeah, it definitely seems to help, so it does not replace manual therapy from someone that's experienced and knows how to do it, though. I definitely can say that pretty confidently. Like, I've used the gun pretty extensively. It does not replace that. But yeah, I mean, it's a good alternative, especially for a quick fix, for tight muscles or areas that are impinged and need freed up, or just additional blood flow to certain areas. Yeah, I think it definitely is a viable option in that regard. And there are a lot of them out there now that the prices are going down, and there's more options, because there's more on the market, so you can get them for cheaper. And could be a worthwhile option, something to have on hand, especially if you don't have access to getting actual soft tissue therapy done by someone, or at least not very regularly. All right, is it possible to use enough dietary cinnamon to have a GDA effect as opposed to supplementing it with capsule form? Yeah, you could. I think if I'm trying to remember right, I want to say it's at least 1 gram clear up to like 5 or 6 grams is where most of the effect is. And you want to use Cylon or Cylon. I'm not sure if that's how you spell it or pronounce it. I think it's Ceylon, I think is how you say it. That type of cinnamon, because there's the cheaper cinnamon is a different variation. So you want this one particularly if you're going to use it like that. I mean, 1 to 6 grams. You could put a gram on food pretty easily depending on what you're eating. So it might elicit some effect. It's not as concentrated. A lot of the capsule forms are going to use a certain extract. It's going to be more concentrated, right? But yeah, you could do it for sure. I mean, you probably even get a couple grams on there, just depending on what what you're eating, without it being too overbearing, right? So yeah, I would say it's absolutely possible. And if you have stuff that cinnamon complements well and you can use it a couple times a day, it could be a decent option. I mean, it's certainly not gonna hurt. I know cinnamon does have some toxicity issues up to like a certain dose, but you'd have to go well over what I'm talking about here to have to worry about that. And the food would probably be disgusting at that point. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. Okay. All right. How long should you wait before drinking anything after a meal? 20, 30 minutes. If you have a really bad habit of wanting to chug, water or something after a meal, maybe put a piece of sugar-free gum in your mouth or something, chew on that for a while. It starts losing its flavor. You're probably good, right? And then you can get fluids in. So, excuse me. But I don't think there's an exact. I mean, because if you really want to get technical, the digestive process is going to be going on for a long period of time, a couple hours more. So realistically, you're not going to never drink anything between meals, right? But typically I notice at least 20, 30 minutes before you consume any sizable amount of fluid is what I would say. Okay. Besides peak level differences, does Humalog and Lantus provide any benefit, whereas the other does not? Or is it solely preference, macro allotment, nutrient timing based? So, yeah, kinda. The biggest one, probably the only really noteworthy one, would be that Lantus has a really high IGF binding affinity. Okay, so, and if you look at some of the other basal, because there are other basal insulins, right? There's like Trazeo, and there are like some in between, some very long acting ones, the newer ones. There also are older basals, if you call it a basal, like Novolin N, that is over the counter in the US. They don't have that, at least not to that extent. So that would probably be the biggest benefit. And then obviously just ease of use. Doesn't really require any type of timing. It doesn't require it's not really like much risk of going hypoglycemic. And even if you did, you would produce some hepatic, your liver would dump a little bit of glucose to compensate pretty easily. Whereas, with a rapid, your liver also does that, right? If you go hypo, you sweat and your liver's gonna start pumping it out, but that jacks adrenaline and cortisol up really quickly, and that's not particularly a good thing either if it's done, if it happens often. But preference, I mean, yeah, so you have higher IGF binding affinity. Now, if you're looking for hypertrophy specifically, that's going to be beneficial, considering, if it's used with growth hormone, that's kind of the point, right? Is the IGF synergy. So, that would really be the whole idea behind it, and which could make it a better option. And the fact that it's easier, but you could use both together. Or, it doesn't. We did a whole podcast on this, so on the OPD, so go check that if you didn't. And we may have even talked about that on there, but that would be the biggest benefit, is that binding affinity is sizably different. So, all right. Preferred diet protocol for a DNP blast. Obviously, Valley deficit, but high protein keto, high protein, low carb, high carb, etc. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of different opinions on this. It does. There can be some free radical release, so people would say, use additional like fruits in the diet for antioxidants. It depletes liver glycogen. Use fruit because of fructose. You can do that for sure. Here's the thing: is I don't know what you mean by blast. Like I don't know what the doses are going to vary. I mean, in a low dose, you could use it in the background and probably not even really notice it's there, other than maybe you're a little warm, but you're not really going to notice it. It's not going to be like making you super sluggish, make you feel like shit, and cause a bunch of toxicity. But in a higher dose, it definitely will, and impact performance and all that, So, not really sure what you mean by blast, but in a low to moderate amount that's not causing a ton of side effects, you would just keep it the same. Because a lot of people have this idea that you can that you're like not going to out eat it. What it doesn't do, it doesn't burn that many calories. There are different figures out there, but if you're something like 100 milligrams would give you, so much increase in caloric expenditure. It's not very much. You might get 100 calories or something like that. It's not significant. You know what I mean? So, it is significant in the grand scheme, but it's not significant in the fact that you could like just eat whatever. Doesn't work like that. So it doesn't make that much difference. Just use a lower dose that's tolerable and you can still function on and keep your diet the same in a deficit, and it'll just enhance what you're doing. If you want to shift a little bit more towards carbohydrates, it can increase body heat a little bit, as long as it's not making it to the point where you're fucking like, sweating so bad that you can't function, because it will, people can raise their body heat up so much, especially with more carbohydrate consumption, and they're just miserable. So take that with a grain of salt. But in terms of like actual effectiveness of it, it's still going to work pretty similarly either way. So just consider those factors that I mentioned, more or less. Key points, tips on progressing on specific exercises, lifts, how to improve in weights and reps as best as possible. Well, there's a couple things you consider. So potentially choose exercises that have a large window in which you can improve. And what I mean by that is maybe something that you're not that good at. That's something that you could do. You could be good at exercises, that's okay. But if you take something that you're not that good at, you have a large margin where you can improve, because you probably haven't done it very much, right? It's because you just don't like it, because you're not very good at it again. So that might be a good thing to think about. Or exercises that require a large load, so you have more room to improve. It's a lot harder to improve on a side lateral raise versus a overhead press, because the weight is significantly different. So to get 5 pounds, to go from a 35 to a 40 pound dumbbell on your side lateral raise, or on your lateral raise, is going to be a lot harder than to put 5 pounds aside on your overhead press, right? So, you can consider that as well. Things that you can psychologically get pumped up for, that gives you an advantage for sure. I do a couple things, right? I pick exercises that I'm not that good at. I do some that I am good at still, but also have a large room, high ceiling on. And then exercises that I can get pumped up for. I like to do those. Exercises that don't require a spotter. Maybe like I'm spitballing. Maybe don't require lots of assistance, and you can just do without needing anyone else's help. I would say those are probably the main things. So psychological exercises that have a large window in which you can improve. So, weight wise, and then also sometimes pick exercises that you're not very good at that you can improve on for a long period of time. And that gives you a lot more room to keep continuously, progressively overloading. If you've been doing the same 315 pound bench press for 5 years, so you're not going to improve on it anymore, that's not the exercise to pick to work your progressive overload on. Okay, so keep that in mind. I see everyone being concerned with high blood pressure, systolic in particular, while on anabolics, and with good reason. What about if you have the opposite issue regarding diastolic being constantly under 60, sometimes under 50, while systolic is between 100 to 120? Well, you need to look at it as a scope. So there are different reasons that you might have isolated systolic hypertension and isolated diastolic hypertension. And then there's something called pulse pressure, which is essentially just the gap between the two. So that's kind of what you're looking at. I would look at here is some experts would argue that this pulse pressure is pretty important. Now, I've seen different arguments on this. I've seen arguments that say it's not that important, especially for people that have normal blood pressure. People that have as systolic hypertension and a big pulse pressure, they should pay attention. But people that have normal blood pressure, both systolic and diastolic, it's not really as important. But essentially 60, they say about 60 or under. So, in your example, if we'll put it in the center, right? If we'll say your systolic's 110 and your diastolic's 50, that's a pulse, that's a gap of 60, right? So you're kind of right on that edge, but you're also in range with both systolic and diastolic pressure as well. Now, too low can be a couple things. I mean, depends. I would want to know about someone's lifestyle too. Like, you're going to see lower blood pressure in people that are more cardio adapted. So if they do a lot of cardio, or if they do like things like HIIT cardio often, and it can change from time to time. It can change based on body weight too. I mean, like, your blood pressure is going to go down in a contest prep as you get really lean and you're doing tons of cardio, assuming that you're not super stressed out, right? If you're really stressed out, then it might go up. Or if using like massive amounts of stimulants, it might go up. But it could go down as body weight goes down, and you're more cardio adapted, it's going to go down. So you'd want to consider those things. But yeah, I would look at a couple things. How do you feel? Are you getting like super dizzy when you stand up? Things like that could be an indication that you're having side effects from too low of blood pressure. Also, pulse pressure gap, and are you in range with your top and bottom number? So look at those variables not in isolation, but as a whole. Okay, so hope that helps. Now, last one. Best macro for bulking to keep gaining lean tissue. Oh my. I have no idea how to answer that question. There's not really enough context for me to answer that. Increase the macro that you digest well and that you feel good with, I guess, would be a way to look at it. Also, are you using other exogenous things like insulin, or are you what's your training like? What does your blood glucose look like? What is your digestion like per each macro look like, which I just mentioned? There's a lot of variables there of how you would determine which macronutrient you would want to increase. At a point, you know, at a point, like protein can go up some if you absolutely have to increase macronutrient, like at all costs, right? And fat can go up some if you digest it good enough. But it seems that carbohydrate's the one that you can push up highest in most people simply because it digests quicker and there's not as much disruption in digestion time from meal to meal, and you can just get away with more, right? Because the transit time, gastric emptying, is just a lot faster. So that I guess you could say that, but again, that's not going to be the case with every single person. So I would consider some of those other variables as well. All right. Oh, nope. There is one more. 2 days anadrol, 2 days VAR, or 2 weeks anadrol, 2 weeks VAR. What method, in your opinion, is more beneficial to provide results with less sides? Neither. I mean, stick to one. Don't constantly throw blood levels around. Stick to variables that you can manage and not, especially when you're talking about manipulating hormones. Stick to things that you can easily quantify and that you can easily manipulate and that you can easily assess instead of constantly moving things around. 2 days of something's not going to do that much. I mean, it's going to be in and out. Let levels build. Now, granted, these are quicker acting, so I mean, the blood levels are going to build quick, right? It's not going to take weeks to do that. However, you're not going to get tons of benefit just constantly rotating. Just, pick one and stick to it, or use both in lesser dose and stick to that. So it's really up to you. But if to answer the question, less bouncing around is probably going to be the more beneficial of the two in any case. Especially what you're asking here. I'm assuming you say provide better results with less sides. Like, I don't really know what the goal is. I don't know if this is a fat loss or muscle growth either. So yeah, I don't know. Not enough context here. That's about all I could say. So, all right, guys, thanks for the questions, and we'll talk to you guys next time.